The crystal chandelier above me scattered light like shattered diamonds across the polished marble floor. I moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, my black server's uniform blending into the shadows between clusters of wealthy art collectors. The tray in my hands felt heavier with each passing hour, my fingers aching from maintaining the perfect balance of champagne flutes that cost more than my weekly rent. This wasn't my usual world. I was a substitute, called in last minute when one of the regular servers at the Beaumont Gallery had called in sick. The pay was good, triple my normal rate, which was the only reason I'd agreed to work this charity art auction. That, and the desperate need to make next month's rent after my hours had been cut at the cafe. The gallery hummed with the low murmur of conversation, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter from groups admiring abstract paintings I couldn't begin to understand. Women in designer gowns glided past me, their perfume a nauseating mixture of florals and musk. Men in tailored suits gestured animatedly with hands adorned with watches that probably cost more than my car. I was invisible here, which was exactly how I preferred it. After 8 months of looking over my shoulder, of changing my phone number twice, of taking different routes home from work, invisibility had become my greatest asset. Miss, another round for table 7. Marco, the floor manager, appeared at my elbow. His voice clipped with the professional irritation that seemed permanently etched into his features. His eyes flickered over my shoulder, scanning the room with the vigilance of someone who knew exactly how much money was flowing through this space. I nodded, already turning toward the service station. My lower back ached, a dull throb that radiated down to my ankles. 4 hours into this shift, and I still had 3 more to go. The heels they'd required us to wear were a size too small, pinching my toes with each step. As I wove through the crowd, I caught fragments of conversation. Art terminology I didn't understand. Names of painters I'd never heard of. Casual mentions of 6-figure purchases delivered with the same tone someone might use to discuss buying groceries. I was refilling my tray when I saw him. Trent. The champagne bottle in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My vision tunneled, the edges of the room blurring as my ex-boyfriend's familiar profile came into sharp focus across the gallery. He was laughing, his hand resting possessively on the arm of a woman in a red dress. The same laugh I'd once found charming now sent ice through my veins. 8 months. 8 months since I'd changed my locks, since I'd filed the restraining order that he'd violated 3 times before the police finally took me seriously. 8 months of blocked numbers, of him showing up at my workplace until I quit, of finding him parked outside my apartment at 2 a.m. And now, he was here. My hands trembled as I set down the champagne bottle. Marco would notice if I abandoned my post, but every instinct screamed at me to run. Trent hadn't seen me yet, too absorbed in his conversation with the woman and 2 other men I didn't recognize. I needed to leave. Now. Moving as quickly as I dared without drawing attention, I slipped through a service door that led to the back corridors of the gallery. The sounds of the auction faded, replaced by the harsh fluorescent lighting and bare concrete walls of the service area. My breathing came in short gasps, panic clawing at my throat. I couldn't let him see me. If Trent knew where I worked, even temporarily, he would find a way to make my life hell again. The restraining order was just paper. It had never actually stopped him before. Behind me, I heard voices, male voices getting closer. I couldn't tell if one of them was Trent, but I wasn't going to wait to find out. There was a door ahead on my right, unmarked. Storage, probably. Somewhere I could hide until the coast was clear, until I could slip out the back exit and disappear into the night. I pushed the door open and stumbled inside, my eyes struggling to adjust to the dim lighting. Not storage. A bathroom. A private, luxurious bathroom with marble countertops and gold fixtures. The kind of space reserved for VIP guests, not servers fleeing their abusive ex-boyfriends. And I wasn't alone. A man stood at the mirror, adjusting a watch on his wrist. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with the kind of precision that only came from custom tailoring. Dark hair swept back from a face all sharp angles and aristocratic features. He looked up as I entered, his eyes meeting mine in the reflection. Gray eyes. Storm cloud gray, assessing me with an intensity that made me freeze in the doorway. "I'm sorry," I stammered, already backing toward the door. "I thought this was—" The voices in the hallway grew louder, closer. One of them might be Trent. I couldn't be sure, but the panic that had driven me here surged fresh through my veins. The man's eyes flickered past me to the door, then back to my face. He seemed to take in my expression, the fear I couldn't hide, in a single glance. Without a word, he reached past me and flipped off the light switch. Darkness swallowed the room. I gasped, disoriented, as his hand closed around my wrist. Not rough, but firm, unmistakable. He pulled me deeper into the bathroom, positioning us behind the door just as it began to open. "Thought I saw someone come in here," a voice said. Not Trent's. Relief and continued terror warred in my chest. "Bathroom's occupied," the man beside me called out, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for argument. The sign was removed for repair. "Oh, sorry, sir." The door clicked shut again. We stood in silence. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and too loud. Could feel the warmth radiating from his body, standing close enough that the scent of his cologne reached me. Something expensive, with notes of cedar and bergamot. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there in the darkness, his hand still loosely circling my wrist, as if waiting for confirmation that I was safe. "They're gone," I whispered finally. He released me immediately, stepping back. A moment later, soft light filled the room as he turned on a small lamp above the mirror, rather than the harsh overhead fluorescent. In the gentler lighting, I got my first clear look at him. Mid-30s, maybe. That aristocratic face I'd glimpsed earlier was even more striking up close. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled, and those unsettling gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "Thank you," I managed. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just needed to hide." It wasn't a question. He adjusted his cufflinks with precise movements, as if pulling a terrified woman into a dark bathroom was an everyday occurrence for him. "From someone at the auction?" I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. Something about his calm demeanor, the way he'd reacted without question to help me, made my throat tight with unexpected emotion. "Are you in danger?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying an edge I couldn't quite identify. "Not immediate danger," I said. "Just someone I used to know, someone I'd rather avoid." He studied me for a long moment, and I had the unsettling feeling that he was cataloging every detail. The cheap fabric of my uniform, the ill-fitting heels, the way I was trying very hard not to fall apart. "You're one of the servers," he observed. "Temporary," I clarified quickly. "Just for tonight. I don't usually work events like this." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "That's apparent." The words should have stung, but his tone held no judgment, just statement of fact. "I should go," I said, moving toward the door. "Thank you again for—" "Wait." The single word stopped me. "Give it a few more minutes. Let whoever you're avoiding get settled elsewhere in the gallery." It was sound advice. I nodded, retreating to lean against the far wall, as far from him as the small bathroom allowed. He returned to the mirror, making minute adjustments to his appearance that already looked flawless. I watched him in silence, trying not to stare but unable to look away completely. There was something mesmerizing about his movements, the careful precision of each gesture. "Cillian," he said suddenly, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "My name is Cillian Ashford." The name meant nothing to me, though from his tone, I suspected it should have. "Seraphine," I replied. "Seraphine Winters." He turned to face me fully, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. The posture should have been casual, but on him it looked calculated. Every movement seemed deliberate, controlled. "And who are you hiding from, Seraphine Winters?" "Just someone from my past," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are." He tilted his head slightly, studying me with that unnerving intensity again. "This person, do they pose an actual threat to you?" I hesitated. Trent's threats had always been subtle, couched in concern and love. But the reality of his obsession had been terrifying enough to send me into hiding for 8 months. "He used to," I admitted quietly. "I have a restraining order, but he doesn't always respect it." Cillian's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered through his eyes. "I see." The silence that followed felt charged with unspoken questions. I fidgeted with the edge of my uniform, suddenly acutely aware of how out of place I was. This man, in his custom suit and expensive watch, standing in a private VIP bathroom at a charity auction. And me, a substitute server hiding from my ex. "I really should get back to work," I said, pushing off from the wall. "They'll notice if I'm gone too long." "What's his name?" Cillian asked, his voice still quiet, but carrying an undertone that made me pause. "Why?" "Professional curiosity." He straightened, buttoning his suit jacket with those same precise movements. "I find it useful to know who poses problems in spaces I frequent." There was something in the way he said it that made me think he meant something more than just being aware of troublesome guests. "Trent," I said finally. "Trent Morrison. But please, I don't want any trouble. I just need to finish my shift and leave without him noticing me." Cillian nodded slowly. "Understood, though I suspect avoiding him for the rest of the evening may prove difficult in a space this size." He was right, and we both knew it. The Beaumont Gallery was sprawling, but not infinite. Eventually, Trent would circulate through the entire space, and there was every chance he'd spot me. "I'll manage," I said with more confidence than I felt. "I always do." Something that might have been respect crossed Cillian's features. "I don't doubt that." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a card, extending it to me. "However, should you find yourself in need of assistance, I'm quite skilled at solving problems." I took the card, reading the embossed text. Cillian Ashford. Antiquities acquisition and private sales. A phone number. Nothing more. "Thank you," I said, slipping the card into my pocket. "But I don't think I could afford your kind of problem-solving." "Perhaps not," he agreed, "but consider it a professional courtesy. Anyone who chooses to hide in a stranger's bathroom rather than cause a scene has a certain discretion I appreciate." Before I could respond, he moved past me to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "I suggest you wait another 60 seconds before leaving. I'll draw attention near the main gallery, which should pull focus away from this corridor." "Why are you helping me?" The question escaped before I could stop it. He glanced back, those gray eyes unreadable. "Because 8 months is a long time to be running from someone. And because men who make women feel they need to run shouldn't be allowed to continue operating unchecked." Then he was gone, the door clicking softly shut behind him. I counted to 60, as he'd suggested, my mind racing. Cillian Ashford. The name still meant nothing to me, but something about him, about the casual authority in his voice and the cold calculation in his eyes when I'd mentioned Trent, suggested he was exactly the kind of man Trent would cross the street to avoid. When I finally emerged into the corridor, it was empty. I made my way back to the service station, slipping into the flow of servers as if I'd never left. Marco shot me a sharp look but said nothing, too busy coordinating the next round of drinks to interrogate me about my absence. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I caught glimpses of Trent throughout the night, but always at a safe distance. Twice I noticed Cillian as well, moving through the crowd with the same controlled grace I'd witnessed in the bathroom. Once, our eyes met across the gallery, and he gave the smallest nod of acknowledgement before turning back to the painting he'd been examining. By the time the auction concluded and the guests began filtering out, exhaustion had settled into my bones. My feet screamed in protest with each step, and my lower back felt like it might give out entirely. But I'd made it through without Trent seeing me. That counted as a victory. I was collecting my tips at the end of the night when Marco approached, his expression inscrutable. Ms. Winters? My heart sank. Had someone complained about my extended disappearance? Yes. Mr. Ashford asked me to give you this. He handed me an envelope, thick cream paper that felt expensive even before I opened it. Inside was a substantial tip, far more than I'd earned from my entire night of work, and beneath it, a handwritten note in elegant script. For your discretion and professionalism. Should you need that problem solved, the offer remains open. CA. I stared at the note for a long moment, my thumb tracing the embossed initials at the top of the paper. Then I tucked it carefully into my purse alongside his business card and headed for the exit. Behind me, the Beaumont Gallery glittered with the remnants of the evening's excess. Ahead, the cold night air promised temporary safety. And in my pocket, Cillian Ashford's card felt like a dangerous possibility I couldn't quite bring myself to dismiss. The cafe where I worked my regular shifts smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and stale pastries. After the crystal chandeliers and champagne of the Beaumont Gallery, returning to the cracked vinyl booths and flickering fluorescent lights felt like stepping into a different world entirely. 3 days had passed since the auction. 3 days of looking over my shoulder, of jumping at every male voice, of clutching pepper spray in my pocket during my walk home from the bus stop. Trent hadn't found me. Yet. I pulled another double shift, covering for Marissa who'd called in sick again. By 8 p.m., my feet had gone numb, and my smile felt like it had been painted on my face. The dinner rush had finally died down, leaving me to wipe down tables in blissful silence. The bell above the door chimed. I looked up, my standard greeting dying on my lips. Cillian Ashford stood in the doorway of my cafe, looking as out of place as a Monet in a dollar store. He'd traded his suit for dark slacks and a cashmere sweater, but the effect was the same. Money, power, and control radiated from every inch of him. Good evening, Seraphine. He slid into a booth near the window with the easy grace of someone accustomed to commanding any space he occupied. I approached slowly, my cleaning rag still in hand. Mr. Ashford, this is unexpected. I was in the neighborhood. His tone suggested this was entirely untrue. I thought I'd stop in for coffee. We both knew the neighborhood where my cafe was located wasn't anywhere someone like him would normally find themselves. The industrial edge of town, wedged between a laundromat and a check-cashing place, catered to factory workers and students, not antiquities dealers. Of course. I pulled out my order pad with shaking hands. What can I get you? Black coffee, and whatever you recommend for dinner. I scribbled the order, hyper-aware of his eyes following my movements. The meatloaf special is popular. Then I'll have that. I retreated to the kitchen, my pulse racing. Why was he here? How had he found my regular workplace? The card I'd tucked away in my purse suddenly felt less like a possibility, and more like a threat. When I returned with his coffee, he was examining the cracked Formica tabletop, as if it were a piece of art requiring authentication. Your establishment has character, he observed, accepting the mug I set before him. That's one word for it. I lingered, uncertain whether I should return to my cleaning or acknowledge the elephant in the room. How did you find me? The same way I find most things worth finding. He took a sip of coffee, his expression suggesting it was exactly as terrible as expected. Careful observation and professional contacts. A chill ran down my spine. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. He set down the mug. Sit, please. You've been on your feet all day, and we have things to discuss. I glanced toward the kitchen where Diego was working the grill, then slid into the booth across from Cillian. It felt wrong, sitting with a customer, but the cafe was nearly empty, and my curiosity outweighed my professionalism. What things? I asked, keeping my voice low. Trent Morrison. He said the name with the same inflection one might use for a particularly unimpressive forgery. I've done some research since our encounter at the gallery. My stomach dropped. Why would you do that? Because men like him interest me professionally. Cillian leaned back, one arm draped across the booth's back. He has debts, significant ones, to several parties who don't appreciate delays in repayment. I don't understand what that has to do with me. You mentioned a restraining order, 8 months of hiding. That suggests a pattern of behavior that goes beyond a simple breakup. His gray eyes held mine. I'm offering you a solution. I don't need... You do, he interrupted quietly. Because men like Trent Morrison don't stop until they're forced to stop. And restraining orders are just pieces of paper to someone desperate enough. He wasn't wrong, but the casual way he discussed it, as if he dealt with situations like mine regularly, set alarm bells ringing in my head. What kind of solution? I asked carefully. The permanent kind. He let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Not physical harm, if that's your concern. I'm not a violent man, Seraphine. But I am a thorough one, and I have access to information that could make Trent Morrison's life very, very difficult. Information? His debts, for instance, who he owes money to, what those people might do if they discovered exactly where to find him, and when he'd be most vulnerable to repayment discussions. Cillian's tone remained conversational, as if we were discussing the weather, rather than destroying someone's life. Or perhaps his employer would be interested to know about certain financial irregularities in his expense reports. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the elegant man before me with what he was proposing. You're talking about ruining him. I'm talking about ensuring he has more pressing concerns than stalking his ex-girlfriend. He tilted his head slightly. Would you prefer he continue as he has been? Showing up at your workplaces, violating legal orders, making you live in fear? No, I admitted. But what you're suggesting is justice that the legal system has failed to provide. He leaned forward. I saw your face at the gallery, Seraphine. That wasn't simple discomfort, that was terror. And I find I have very little patience for men who inspire that level of fear in women. Diego appeared with Cillian's meatloaf, breaking the intensity of the moment. I used the interruption to collect my thoughts, watching as Cillian examined his dinner with the same careful attention he seemed to give everything. Why? I asked after Diego had retreated. Why do you care about helping me? Because I can. He cut into the meatloaf with surgical precision. And because I'm extending a proposition that benefits us both. Both? I have need of someone with particular qualities. Discretion. The ability to blend into various social situations. A certain resilience born of navigating difficult circumstances. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. You possess all of these. I'm a waitress, I said flatly. You're a survivor who knows how to be invisible when necessary and memorable when required. He set down his fork. The way you moved through that auction, serving drinks while simultaneously cataloging every exit and tracking the location of someone you feared. That's not standard server training. The accuracy of his observation unsettled me. What exactly are you proposing? 3 weeks, Cillian said. You accompany me to a series of auctions and private sales as my guest. You'll be compensated generously for your time. In return, I'll ensure Trent Morrison becomes far too occupied with his own problems to concern himself with you. Your guest? I repeated. As in, pretending to be your girlfriend? As my companion. The nature of our relationship can be whatever makes you comfortable. He resumed eating, as if we were discussing nothing more significant than dinner plans. I attend events where having someone beside me serves a useful purpose. You need protection, and the means to establish independence. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. I should have said no immediately. Should have recognized this for what it was, a deal with someone who operated in the shadows between legal and illegal, someone who could research Trent's debts and presumably access information that shouldn't be accessible. But the thought of 3 more months, 3 more years of looking over my shoulder, of changing jobs every time Trent tracked me down, of living in constant fear, made me hesitate. What kind of events? I asked. Auctions primarily. Some private viewings and sales. Nothing dangerous, though I won't pretend the circles I move in are entirely wholesome. He met my eyes. I deal in antiquities, Seraphine. Sometimes those antiquities have complicated provenance. Sometimes the people who desire them have complicated pasts. But you would never be at physical risk. 3 weeks of pretending to be your companion, and you make Trent disappear from my life. That's the deal? In essence, yes. He pushed his plate aside, the meatloaf only half eaten. I'll also provide appropriate clothing for the events, cover all expenses, and ensure your current employers won't penalize you for the time away. How would you do that? The same way I do most things. Money and influence, applied where needed. I thought about my apartment, with its broken lock I couldn't afford to replace. About the pepper spray in my pocket that might not be enough if Trent decided to escalate. About 8 months of fear that had become so routine I'd almost stopped noticing it. I want to see proof, I said finally, that you can actually do what you're claiming. That Trent has these debts you mentioned. Cillian's slight smile held satisfaction. A reasonable request. He withdrew his phone, tapped it a few times, then turned it to face me. On the screen was a detailed financial breakdown. Trent's name at the top, followed by a list of debts to various creditors, some of them with names that sounded distinctly unfriendly. The numbers made my eyes widen. How did you get this? I told you, I'm thorough. He pocketed the phone. So, do we have an arrangement? Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that I was trading one form of control for another. But Cillian wasn't asking me to live in fear, wasn't asking me to change my entire life, just 3 weeks of it. If I agree, and I'm not saying I am, I want ground rules, I said. Clear boundaries about what this arrangement involves. Of course, I'm not interested in anything you're not willingly offering. He pulled out his card again, this one with a different number than the first. Think about it tonight. Call this number tomorrow with your decision. If yes, we'll meet to discuss terms. If no, you never hear from me again, and I forget we had this conversation. I took the card, my fingers brushing against his. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through me. One more question, I said. Why me, specifically? You could hire an actual professional for this kind of thing. An escort, a model, someone who knows how to navigate these events. Because professionals in that arena come with their own complications and potential conflicts of interest. He stood, pulling out his wallet and laying cash on the table, far more than the meal cost. And because when I saw you in that bathroom, hiding from someone who terrified you, you didn't beg for help. You didn't break down. You regrouped and made a plan. That suggests a strength I find far more valuable than mere beauty or social polish. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Seraphine, if you do decide to accept, understand that 3 weeks is simply the beginning. Once I've made Trent's life sufficiently complicated, the information I've gathered about him doesn't disappear. Should he ever bother you again, ever, that information becomes much more actively deployed. That sounds like a threat, It's a guarantee. He pushed open the door, the bell chiming cheerfully. Sleep well. Tomorrow you'll make a choice that changes everything. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with his half-eaten meatloaf, a generous tip, and a business card that felt like it weighed more than it should. Diego emerged from the kitchen. Who was that guy? He looked important. I'm not sure, I admitted, staring at the door where Cillian had disappeared into the night. Someone who might solve my problems, or create entirely new ones. Both, probably, Diego said with the wisdom of someone who'd seen enough of life to recognize dangerous opportunities when they appeared. I finished my shift in a daze, mechanically cleaning tables and refilling coffee cups while my mind raced. 3 weeks. That was all he was asking. 3 weeks in exchange for freedom from Trent's obsession. And if Cillian was lying, if this was some elaborate scheme for purposes I couldn't yet identify, then I'd be no worse off than I already was. Still hiding, still afraid, still looking over my shoulder every moment of every day. When I finally left the cafe just after midnight, I found a car waiting at the curb. Not Cillian's, but a driver in a dark suit who approached with professional courtesy. Ms. Winters? Mr. Ashford asked me to ensure you arrive home safely. I should have refused, should have insisted on taking the bus as usual, maintaining my independence and boundaries. Instead, I let him open the car door and slid into the leather interior, too exhausted and too overwhelmed to argue. As we pulled away from the cafe, I noticed another car, parked half a block down with its lights off. The silhouette in the driver's seat looked familiar. Too familiar. Trent. He'd found my workplace again. Was sitting there right now, waiting to follow me home, to learn where I lived now that I'd moved apartments twice to escape him. Except I wasn't walking to the bus stop, wasn't taking my usual route. And the driver Cillian had sent took enough turns and circled enough blocks that anyone following would have been obvious. By the time we reached my building, I was certain we hadn't been tailed. Mr. Ashford instructed me to ensure the gentleman in question didn't follow you, the driver said as he opened my door. Consider it a preview of the services offered should you accept his proposal. I stumbled into my apartment, locked the 3 locks I'd installed myself, and collapsed onto my second-hand couch. Cillian's card sat on my coffee table, next to the pepper spray and the copy of the restraining order I kept as a reminder of everything I'd been through. 3 weeks. Freedom from Trent. And all I had to do was trust a man I barely knew, who dealt in stolen art and had access to information he shouldn't have. I should have spent the night agonizing over the decision. Instead, I picked up my phone and dialed the number on his card. He answered on the second ring. Seraphine. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I accept. But I want to meet tomorrow to discuss those ground rules. Excellent. I could hear satisfaction in his voice. There's a coffee shop on 5th and Marlowe. 10 a.m.? I'll be there. One more thing, he said. Pack a bag, enough for 3 weeks. You won't be returning to your apartment until the arrangement concludes. What? If we're doing this, we're doing it properly, which means removing you entirely from any location Trent might find you. His tone allowed no argument. Don't worry, your rent will be paid. Your job at the cafe will be handled. And when you return, Trent Morrison will be too busy dealing with far more serious problems to concern himself with you. He hung up before I could protest. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, holding my phone and wondering what exactly I'd just agreed to. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled like stars in a polluted sky. Somewhere out there, Trent was probably still circling the block around the cafe, wondering where I'd disappeared to. And somewhere else, Cillian Ashford was already setting whatever plan he'd concocted into motion. I'd made my choice. Now I just had to survive the consequences. The coffee shop on 5th and Marlowe was the opposite of my cafe. Gleaming espresso machines, minimalist furniture, and customers who paid $8 for lattes topped with foam art. I arrived 15 minutes early, anxious energy making it impossible to wait in my apartment any longer. Cillian was already there, seated at a corner table with a clear view of both entrances. He rose as I approached, and I noticed he'd abandoned his formal attire for dark jeans and a button-down shirt that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Seraphine, thank you for coming." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I took the liberty of ordering you a coffee. Vanilla latte, if I remember correctly from your order pad last night." The fact that he'd noticed such a small detail should have comforted me. Instead, it reinforced how thoroughly he observed everything. "Thank you." I sat, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "You said we'd discuss terms. Directly to business. I appreciate that." He pulled out a leather portfolio, extracting a document that he slid across the table. "This is a contract outlining our arrangement. Non-disclosure on both sides, compensation details, schedule of events, and most importantly, the boundaries you mentioned." I scanned the document, my eyes widening at the compensation figure. "This is too much." "It's appropriate for the service provided." He sipped his own coffee, black as promised. "You'll be accompanying me to high-value events where your presence serves a specific purpose. The compensation reflects that reality." "Which is what exactly? Why do you need someone beside you at auctions?" Cillian was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "In my line of work, appearing alone suggests vulnerability or desperation. Having a companion, particularly one who isn't obviously hired, conveys stability and success. It makes certain types of negotiations smoother. So I'm window dressing. Your strategic presentation." He met my eyes. "I deal with collectors who notice everything. Showing up with someone different each time would raise questions about my reliability. But appearing with the same woman across multiple events suggests a stability that makes people more comfortable conducting business with me." It made a twisted kind of sense, and it was honest, which I hadn't entirely expected. "What about the physical boundaries?" I asked, turning to that section of the contract. "It says here that we'll maintain the appearance of a romantic relationship in public spaces." Appearance being the operative word. Cillian leaned back. "I may need to touch your arm, your back, occasionally your hand. There may be moments where standing close or sharing a dance is beneficial for maintaining the fiction. But nothing beyond what you'd expect from early courtship. No kissing unless you initiate it. No sharing hotel rooms. Your physical autonomy is non-negotiable." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. "And if someone asks directly about our relationship?" "You're free to answer however feels authentic to you. I've found that vague acknowledgement works better than detailed fabrications. We're seeing where things go tends to satisfy curiosity without requiring elaborate backstory." "Have you done this before? Had an arrangement like this?" "Once, several years ago. It ended amicably when she met someone she actually wanted to be with." He smiled slightly. "I attended their wedding, in fact. We remain on good terms." The revelation eased some of my concerns. If his previous arrangement had ended well enough that he'd attended her wedding, perhaps this was genuinely a business transaction rather than something more sinister. "The contract mentions discretion about your business dealings," I said, pointing to a specific clause. "Does that mean I'll witness things that are illegal?" "You'll witness things that occupy the gray spaces between legal and questionable. Acquisitions of items with uncertain provenance. Negotiations with clients who prefer privacy regarding their collections." He held my gaze. "Nothing violent. Nothing that would make you complicit in actual crime. But yes, you'll see how money and desire can bend rules that were meant to be rigid." "And if I'm uncomfortable? If I want out before the 3 weeks are finished?" "There's a termination clause. 2 weeks' notice. Compensation paid through the date of termination, and all arrangements regarding Trent remain in effect regardless." He tapped the relevant section. I'm not interested in keeping you trapped, Seraphine. This only works if you're participating willingly. I read through the entire contract twice, looking for hidden catches or manipulative language. It was surprisingly straightforward. The compensation was broken down clearly, weekly payments into an account of my choosing. Expenses covered included clothing, travel, and lodging. The confidentiality clause applied equally to both parties. What about afterward? I asked. When the 3 weeks are over, what happens between us? That depends entirely on you. Cillian's expression remained neutral. If you prefer to never see me again, that's respected. If you find the arrangement beneficial and wish to continue occasionally, we can discuss ongoing terms. Or we simply part ways as cordial acquaintances. And Trent, you promised to make him disappear from my life. He will. Cillian's tone hardened slightly. I've already begun. The creditors I mentioned have been made aware of his current location and routine. His employer received an anonymous tip about irregularities that will require extensive investigation. Within a week, Trent Morrison will be too busy trying to save his career and avoid debt collectors to worry about tracking down his ex-girlfriend. You work fast. I told you, I'm thorough. He pulled out a phone, different from the one he'd used at the cafe. This is for you, encrypted, untraceable. My number is programmed in, along with a security service that monitors for any sign of Trent approaching your location. If he somehow finds you during the 3 weeks, they'll intervene before he can reach you. I took the phone, the weight of it substantial in my palm. You've thought of everything. It's what I do. He gestured to the contract. So? Do we have an agreement? I should have asked for more time. Should have had a lawyer review the document, though I couldn't afford one, and we both knew it. Should have been more cautious about binding myself to a man whose business operated in those gray spaces he'd mentioned. But I thought about Trent sitting outside my cafe, waiting to follow me home. Thought about 8 months of fear that had reshaped my entire life into one long exercise in avoiding detection. I signed the contract. Cillian witnessed my signature, then signed his own. He slid one copy across to me and tucked the other into his portfolio. We leave tomorrow morning, he said. I'll have a car pick you up at 8. Our first event is in Boston, a private auction at a collector's estate. Tomorrow? I hadn't expected it to move this quickly. Is that a problem? I need to arrange things with my apartment, with Diego at the cafe. Already handled. Your rent is paid for the next 6 months. Diego received a call this morning from someone claiming to be your cousin, explaining you'd be away for a family matter. He wished you well and said your position would be waiting when you returned. I stared at him. How did you? I told you. Thorough. He stood, offering his hand. Welcome aboard, Seraphine. I think we're going to do very well together. I shook his hand, his grip firm and warm. I hope you're right. I usually am. He released my hand, stepping back. Pack light, but versatile. I'll have additional items provided as needed. And Seraphine, try to get some rest tonight. Tomorrow your life changes. He left me sitting in the coffee shop, contract in hand, mind reeling with what I'd just agreed to. My phone buzzed. The new encrypted one. A message from Cillian. Your apartment building's security system has been upgraded. New locks installed on your door by a trusted contractor. When you return, you'll be safer than before. I hadn't even asked him to do that. He'd simply identified a need and addressed it. The gesture should have comforted me. Instead, it highlighted exactly how much power I'd just handed to someone I barely knew. But as I left the coffee shop and caught sight of a familiar figure across the street, Trent, watching from a distance like he'd been tracking me all morning, I felt a surge of defiance. Let him watch. Let him try to follow. Starting tomorrow, I'd be somewhere he couldn't find me, protected by someone far more dangerous than Trent could ever hope to be. I smiled at Trent, just enough for him to see. Then I turned and walked away, heading not toward my apartment but toward the shopping district, where I'd use some of my signing bonus to buy clothes appropriate for mingling with people who bought art worth more than I'd earn in a lifetime. Behind me, I felt Trent's confusion, his frustration at my sudden confidence. Good. Let him wonder what had changed. By the time he figured it out, if he ever did, I'd be long gone and thoroughly protected. And when I returned, if Cillian kept his promises, Trent Morrison would be nothing more than an unpleasant memory I'd finally left behind. The car that picked me up wasn't Cillian's. It was a sleek black sedan with a driver named Marcus, who handled my single suitcase with the reverence usually reserved for valuable artifacts. The interior smelled of leather and subtle cologne, expensive and masculine without being overwhelming. Mr. Ashford is handling last-minute arrangements, Marcus explained as we pulled into traffic. He'll meet you at the airport. Private airport, I discovered an hour later. Not the sprawling commercial terminals I was used to, but a discreet facility where small jets came and went like taxis. Cillian waited on the tarmac beside a gleaming aircraft, looking every inch the powerful businessman in a charcoal suit. Seraphine. He greeted me with a slight smile. Ready for your first adventure? As ready as I can be for something completely outside my experience, I admitted. He guided me up the stairs into the jet. The interior was exactly what I expected from a man like him. Cream leather seats, polished wood accents, and enough space that it didn't feel cramped despite its size. We'll be in Boston in under 2 hours, Cillian said, settling into the seat across from mine. I thought we could use the flight to go over what to expect tonight. I buckled in as the engines powered up, trying to appear calm even as my heart raced. I'm listening. The auction is being held at the Whitmore estate. Cornelius Whitmore was a collector of medieval manuscripts and Renaissance paintings. He died 3 months ago, and his children are liquidating his collection. Cillian pulled out his tablet, showing me images of various artworks. I'm interested in a particular illuminated manuscript. 15th century, possibly stolen from a monastery during the Napoleonic Wars. Possibly stolen? I raised an eyebrow. The provenance is murky, which is why it will sell for less than its actual value. Those who care about legal paperwork will avoid it. Those who appreciate the work itself will see an opportunity. He swiped to another image. The woman who will be our primary competition is Miranda Castellane. French, ruthless, and unforgiving of anyone who outbids her. Should I be worried about her? Only if you can't handle aggressive glaring and possibly a passive-aggressive comment or two. His slight smile suggested he found Miranda's behavior more amusing than threatening. She's known for trying to intimidate other bidders. Having you beside me will help deflect some of that energy. The plane took off smoothly, the ground falling away beneath us. I watched Boston approach through the window, trying to process how drastically my life had shifted in less than 24 hours. Tell me about yourself, Cillian said suddenly. Beyond what I've already learned through observation. Like what? Where you grew up? What made you choose waitressing? Why someone with your intelligence and presence is working jobs that don't challenge either quality? I turned from the window, studying his expression. Is this for the performance? So you know what to say if people ask? Partially. He set aside his tablet. But also because I'm genuinely curious. You agreed to this arrangement with minimal hesitation once you confirmed I could do what I promised. That suggests either desperation or courage. I'd like to know which. Both, probably. I settled deeper into my seat. I grew up in a small town upstate. My parents owned a bookstore. Nothing fancy, but it did okay until Amazon made independent bookstores obsolete. They lost everything when I was 17. Where are they now? Dead. Car accident 2 years later. The words still hurt, even after 6 years. I inherited their debt and not much else. Dropped out of college to work full-time. Been working ever since. Cillian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. And Trent? Met him 4 years ago at a friend's party. He seemed nice, attentive, protective. I laughed bitterly. Turns out the protective thing was actually controlling, but I didn't see it until I tried to leave. By then, he'd isolated me from most of my friends and made himself the center of my world. How long were you together before you recognized the problem? 2 years. Another year trying to leave. 8 months hiding from him after I finally succeeded. I met Cillian's eyes. So yes, desperation and courage. Desperate to finally be free. Courageous enough to accept help from a dangerous stranger to achieve it. I'm not that dangerous, he said mildly. You found Trent's financial records in less than 3 days. You've arranged for his creditors to find him. You have access to encrypted phones and private jets. I gestured around the cabin. You're absolutely dangerous. You're just dangerous in service of helping me, which makes you less terrifying than the alternative. He considered this. Fair assessment. For what it's worth, my particular brand of danger is reserved for those who deserve it. You have nothing to fear from me. Seraphine. Unless I break our contract? Even then, the consequences would simply be termination of our arrangement. I don't punish people for changing their minds. He leaned forward slightly. The people I reserve actual danger for are those who prey on the vulnerable, who use power to intimidate and control. Trent Morrison qualifies on all counts. The intensity in his voice suggested personal experience. I wondered what had happened to make him so committed to protecting people from men like Trent. Before I could ask, the pilot announced our descent into Boston. The city spread beneath us, all red brick and historical architecture. We landed at another private facility, where yet another car waited to transport us to our hotel. Not a hotel. The hotel. The kind with doormen in uniforms and lobby chandeliers that probably cost more than my parents' entire bookstore had been worth. We have adjoining suites, Cillian explained as we rode the elevator to the top floor. Separate entrances, shared sitting room between them if you choose to unlock the connecting door. Complete privacy if you prefer. My suite was larger than my apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The bed was massive, covered in linens that felt like clouds. The bathroom had both a soaking tub and a shower with multiple heads. And hanging in the closet was a dress I definitely hadn't packed. For tonight, Cillian's voice came from the connecting door I'd unlocked out of curiosity. He stood in the threshold, respecting the boundary. If you don't like it, there are 3 others to choose from. My assistant consulted with several boutiques to ensure appropriate options. I touched the midnight blue silk, the fabric impossibly soft. It's beautiful. You'll be beautiful in it. He checked his watch. The auction begins at 7. I'll knock at 6:30 to escort you down. He withdrew, leaving me alone with luxury I'd never expected to experience. I spent the next 2 hours alternating between anxiety and wonder. The dress fit perfectly, hugging my curves before flowing to the floor in elegant waves. My hair, which I'd struggled with all my life, cooperated for once when I styled it up. The minimal jewelry Cillian had included with the dress was clearly real, the diamonds catching light with every movement. At 6:25, I stood before the mirror, barely recognizing myself. I looked like someone who belonged at auctions where medieval manuscripts sold for 6 figures. Cillian's knock came precisely on time. When I opened the door, I found him staring. "You're staring," I said, suddenly self-conscious. "You're stunning." He recovered quickly, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The Whitmore estate was exactly what I expected. Sprawling grounds, neoclassical architecture, and enough security to guard a small nation. We were announced at the entrance, and I felt dozens of eyes turn toward us as we entered the main salon. Cillian's hand rested lightly at the small of my back, a gesture of possession that was surprisingly comforting. He guided me through the crowd with practiced ease, introducing me to various collectors and dealers with a combination of truth and strategic omission. "This is Seraphine," he'd say, never specifying our relationship, letting people draw their own conclusions. I watched him work, navigating conversations like a master chess player. He knew exactly what to say to each person, how to flatter without being obsequious, how to express interest without revealing desperation. And through it all, his attention kept returning to me. Small glances to ensure I was comfortable. Subtle checks that no one was making me uncomfortable. It felt protective without being possessive, attentive without being smothering. "Mr. Ashford." A woman's voice, heavily accented and dripping with disdain. "I see you've brought a companion this time. How quaint." Miranda Castellane was exactly as I'd imagined from Cillian's description. Elegant, sharp-featured, and radiating contempt like perfume. Miranda. Cillian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Always a pleasure. This is Seraphine." She looked me over like I was a painting with questionable provenance. "American?" "Yes," I replied evenly. "How unfortunate." She turned back to Cillian. "I trust you're not planning to bid on the manuscript? It would be such a waste in inexperienced hands." "I'm sure my hands are experienced enough for any treasures I acquire." His tone carried a subtle edge I'd never heard before. Miranda's eyes narrowed. "We shall see." She swept away, trailing expensive perfume and barely concealed hostility. "She's lovely," I murmured. Cillian's laugh was genuine. "She's threatened by you, which means you're doing perfectly." The auction itself was a revelation. I watched Cillian bid with the same precision he applied to everything else, never showing eagerness, never betraying emotion. When Miranda drove the price up on the manuscript, he simply countered with calm certainty until she finally conceded defeat. He'd won. Afterward, as we returned to the hotel in the car, Cillian seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him. "You were perfect tonight," he said. "The way you handled Miranda's rudeness, the way you engaged with the other collectors. You have a natural grace that can't be taught." "I just followed your lead," I said, though his praise sent unexpected warmth through me. "You did more than that. You made people believe we were together. That's harder than it sounds." We reached the hotel, riding the elevator in comfortable silence. At our suite doors, Cillian paused. "Thank you, Seraphine, for tonight, for this arrangement, for trusting me enough to take this leap." "Thank you for giving me a way out," I replied. "From Trent, from fear. This has been—" I searched for the right word. "Extraordinary." His hand came up, brushing a strand of hair from my face with surprising gentleness. "It's only the beginning." The moment stretched between us, charged with possibility. Then he stepped back, the professional distance returning. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we have another event. This time in New York." I retreated to my suite, closing the door behind me and leaning against it. My heart raced for reasons that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the way Cillian had looked at me when I'd opened my door earlier. This was just business. A transaction. 3 weeks of playing a role in exchange for freedom from my past. But as I changed out of the beautiful dress and slipped into bed surrounded by luxury, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just crossed a threshold I hadn't fully understood. And there was no going back. New York, Paris, London, Milan. The cities blurred together in a whirlwind of private jets and 5-star hotels, auction houses, and private viewings. 2 weeks into our arrangement, I'd attended more exclusive events than I'd known existed. And somewhere along the way, the performance had started feeling less like acting. Cillian was attentive without being suffocating, generous without making me feel purchased. He anticipated my needs before I voiced them. An extra sweater when I shivered at an outdoor event. My favorite tea waiting in the hotel room after long evenings. Thoughtful conversation during late-night flights when neither of us could sleep. We fell into rhythms. Morning coffee together, reviewing the day's schedule. Him working on his tablet while I read in comfortable silence. Shared observations about the collectors we encountered, some amusing, some deeply cutting. "Mr. Ashford is clearly smitten," one dealer had whispered to his companion, not realizing I was within earshot. "I've never seen him bring the same woman to consecutive events." I'd mentioned it to Cillian later, expecting him to dismiss it as part of the necessary fiction. Instead, he'd gone quiet, looking at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Perhaps smitten isn't entirely inaccurate," he'd said finally. Now, 3 days before our arrangement ended, we were in Zurich. Another auction, this one featuring ancient artifacts with provenance so questionable that attendance required special invitations and absolute discretion. I wore emerald silk that brought out my eyes. Cillian had chosen it personally, departing from his assistant's selections for the first time. "You should always wear green," he'd said when presenting it. "It suits you." The auction was held in a private vault beneath a bank. Security was extraordinary, each guest vetted and searched before entry. The artifacts on display were breathtaking and clearly stolen from various archaeological sites. "This is different from the others," I murmured to Cillian as we examined a statue that probably belonged in a museum. "Yes, this is where I operate furthest into the gray." He kept his voice low. "If you're uncomfortable, we can leave." I thought about what he'd told me during our first meeting. Nothing violent, nothing that would make me complicit. These pieces were already stolen, already on the black market. Cillian buying them didn't make the theft worse. "I'm fine," I said, "but I want to know where they go, after you acquire them." His slight smile held approval. "Eventually, back to their countries of origin, through carefully anonymous donations to appropriate museums. I'm a middleman, Seraphine. I remove these items from the truly unscrupulous and ensure they end up where they belong." That's not what I expected. I know. Most people assume antiquities dealers are villains hoarding treasures. Some are. I prefer to think of myself as a particularly well-compensated courier service for cultural artifacts. The auction began, and I watched Cillian acquire 3 pieces, 2 ancient coins and a fragment of a Greek amphora. The prices were staggering, but he bid without hesitation. Afterward, we walked through Zurich's old town, the evening cool and pleasant. Cillian had dismissed our driver, preferring to walk. 3 days, I said, breaking the comfortable silence. Our arrangement ends in 3 days. It does. His voice was carefully neutral. Have you thought about what comes after? I had. I'd thought about little else for the past week. The original terms were 3 weeks, I said slowly. But you mentioned the possibility of continuing occasionally. What would that look like? However you'd like it to. He stopped walking, turning to face me. The streetlights cast dramatic shadows across his features. I've grown accustomed to your company, Seraphine, more than I anticipated. If you wanted to continue attending events with me, I would welcome that. For compensation? If that makes you comfortable, yes. Or we could renegotiate terms that feel more equitable. My heart hammered in my chest. Equitable how? I don't want you to feel like you're being paid for your time, he said carefully, but I also don't want to assume that your interest in continuing extends beyond professional obligation. We stood on a cobblestone street in Zurich, the weight of 2 weeks together pressing down on us. 2 weeks of shared looks and growing comfort. 2 weeks of him making me feel safe and seen and valued in ways I'd never experienced. What if it does? I whispered. Extend beyond professional obligation? Cillian's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through his usual control. Then we'd need to discuss what that means. Because the boundaries we established were based on this being purely business. If it's becoming something else, it is, I interrupted. For me, at least. I don't know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between Boston and now, this stopped feeling like acting. He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup my face with the same gentleness he'd shown that night at the hotel. For me as well, from perhaps that very first night, if I'm honest. So where does that leave us? Wherever you want, he said. I meant what I said about your autonomy being non-negotiable. If you want this to remain professional through the final 3 days and then part ways, I'll respect that. If you want to explore what else it could be, I'm very much interested in that possibility. I kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't strategic, just a sudden need to close the distance between us, to stop talking about possibilities and make one real. He responded immediately, his other hand finding my waist and pulling me closer. The kiss was everything I'd imagined during quiet moments over the past 2 weeks. Intense, searching, and carrying the weight of restrained desire finally unleashed. When we broke apart, both breathing harder, Cillian's smile was genuine and unguarded. I should note that kissing wasn't prohibited by our contract, he said, just that I wouldn't initiate it. Convenient loophole, I managed. I thought so. He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. Come on, let's go back to the hotel. That night, we left the connecting door between our suites open, not crossing it yet, not rushing into intimacy we weren't ready for. Just the comfort of knowing the other was close, the barrier between us finally acknowledged and removed. The next morning, over breakfast in Cillian's suite, my encrypted phone buzzed. Security alert. I opened it to find a message from the monitoring service Cillian had arranged. Trent Morrison arrested yesterday on charges of embezzlement and fraud. Currently in custody awaiting arraignment. Subject will likely face significant prison time if convicted. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood. He's actually gone, I said aloud. Cillian looked up from his tablet. Trent? I showed him the message. He read it, his expression satisfied. The investigation I triggered finally bore fruit, he said. His employer found enough evidence to press charges. Combined with his debt situation, he won't be able to make bail. And even if he does eventually, he'll be too busy defending himself to worry about tracking down his ex-girlfriend. 2 weeks ago, this news would have been my only goal. Freedom from Trent, safety from his obsession. Now it felt almost secondary to the bigger shift happening between Cillian and me. Thank you, I said, for all of it, for keeping your promise. I always keep my promises, Seraphine. He set aside his tablet. Which brings us back to our conversation from last night. What do you want? From this? From us? From what comes after the 3 weeks end? I thought about my apartment waiting in New York. Paid for, but empty. Thought about returning to the cafe, to my old life of invisibility and financial struggle. Then I thought about the past 2 weeks, the feeling of being valued, protected, challenged, the conversations that lasted until dawn, the way Cillian looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. I want more than 3 weeks, I said finally, but I don't want it to be transactional anymore. No more contract, no more compensation. If we're doing this, I want it to be real. Real, he repeated, testing the word. Meaning what, specifically? Meaning I want to know everything about you. Not just the antiquities dealer who operates in gray spaces, the person beneath all that control. What made you this way? What you're afraid of? What you want beyond acquiring artifacts? He was quiet for a long moment. That's a considerable ask. I know. And if you can't give me that, then maybe we should stick to the original plan. Part ways after 3 days and remember this as a successful business arrangement. Cillian stood, moving to the window that overlooked Zurich. His reflection in the glass showed tension I rarely saw in him. "My father was a forger," he said finally. "Paintings, documents, provenance certificates. Very good at it. Built a life selling forgeries to people who didn't know better." He paused. "When I was 16, one of his clients figured it out. Came to our house with associates who weren't inclined toward forgiveness." My breath caught. "What happened?" "My father made a deal. Gave them everything he had, including pieces he'd acquired legitimately. They took it all and still beat him badly enough that he never recovered fully. Died 5 years later from complications." Cillian's voice remained even, but I could hear the emotion beneath. "I learned 2 things that day. 1, that power and violence are currencies some people deal in exclusively. 2, that having leverage, having information and resources, is the only real protection." "So you became this," I said softly. "Someone who always has leverage." "Yes. And I've used it mostly for good, or what I consider good. Returning stolen artifacts to where they belong. Making life difficult for people who deserve difficulty." He turned from the window. "But I've also kept people at arm's length. Maintained control always. Let very few people close enough to actually know me. Why? Because closeness is vulnerability, and vulnerability can be exploited." I crossed to him, taking his hands in mine. "I'm not going to exploit you, Cillian." "I know." He squeezed my hands. "Which is terrifying in its own way. Because if I let you in, really in, I'm choosing vulnerability deliberately. Choosing to give someone power over me that I've spent 20 years ensuring no one has." "You don't have to decide right now," I said. "We still have 3 days. Use them to figure out if I'm worth that risk." His smile was wry. "I already know you are. That's not the question. The question is whether I'm brave enough to act on that knowledge." We spent those final 3 days in a bubble of discovery. Cillian showed me parts of himself he'd kept carefully hidden. The dry sense of humor that emerged when his guard lowered. The fierce protectiveness toward people he considered under his care. The genuine passion for history and art that went beyond monetary value. I shared my own carefully guarded vulnerabilities. The grief I still carried for my parents. The shame of having stayed with Trent as long as I had. The fear that I'd never be anything more than someone who served coffee and survived. And through it all, the physical tension between us built slowly, deliberately. Stolen kisses became longer. Touches lingered. By the time we returned to New York, the space between wanting and having had narrowed to nearly nothing. Our final night, in a hotel overlooking Central Park, Cillian sat across from me at dinner in his suite. "The 3 weeks are over," he said. "Contract fulfilled. You're free to walk away, return to your life, and remember this as an interesting interlude." "Or," I prompted, "or you stay. Not as my paid companion, not as part of an arrangement, but as someone I'm choosing to build something with. Something real and undefined and potentially terrifying." I thought about my apartment, about my job at the cafe, about the life I'd built from the rubble of my parents' loss and Trent's obsession. Then I thought about Cillian, about conversations that challenged me, about feeling safe for the first time in years, about the possibility of being more than I'd ever imagined. "I'll stay," I said, "but I need my own space, my own work, my own identity beyond being your companion." Agreed. He clearly anticipated this. "There's an apartment in my building, 2 floors below mine. It's yours if you want it. I'll help you find work that uses your intelligence rather than just your ability to carry trays. And we'll figure out this thing between us at whatever pace feels right." No more contracts? No more contracts. Just 2 people choosing each other daily. With all the uncertainty and possibility that entails, I raised my wine glass to uncertainty and possibility. He clinked his glass against mine, and to choosing vulnerability deliberately. That night, we finally crossed the threshold we'd been dancing around for 3 weeks, and it was everything it should be: intense, genuine, and marking the end of one thing and the beginning of another. The next morning, I moved into the apartment Cillian had offered. 2 floors below his, small but elegant, with a view of the city that reminded me how far I'd come from hiding in restaurant bathrooms. Trent's trial made headlines a month later. He was convicted, sentenced to 5 years. By then, I barely thought about him. He'd become what he should have been all along, a cautionary tale from my past, not a present threat. I found work at an auction house, starting in research but quickly proving my worth. Cillian's contacts helped open doors, but I made sure to earn my position through competence rather than connections. And Cillian and I continued, navigating the delicate balance between intimacy and independence. Some nights I stayed in my apartment. Some nights we fell asleep together in his. We traveled for his work, and I accompanied him when I wanted to, rather than because a contract required it. It wasn't perfect. We fought sometimes, usually about his tendency toward control and my resistance to being managed, but we learned each other's rhythms, boundaries, needs. A year after that first night in Zurich, Cillian returned an ancient Greek kylix to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, through an elaborate donation scheme that ensured no questions about provenance. I stood beside him in the private viewing room, watching him say goodbye to the piece he'd spent 6 months tracking down. "Why do you do this?" I asked. "Acquire these pieces just to give them away?" "Because they belong to everyone," he said simply. "Not to collectors or museums necessarily, but to the cultures that created them. I'm just making sure they complete their journey home." That was when I knew I loved him, not for the power or the protection or the excitement of his world, but for the quiet integrity beneath all the control, the man who used his considerable talents to return stolen beauty to where it belonged. 2 years after our arrangement ended, we were in Lisbon. Cillian had just completed a particularly complex transaction involving Egyptian artifacts that would eventually make their way back to Cairo. We were walking along the Tagus River when he stopped, turning to face me with uncharacteristic nervousness. "I've spent my life acquiring things," he said. "Artifacts, information, leverage, always in control, always certain of what I was getting." "And?" I prompted, sensing something significant coming. "With you, I've never been certain, never in control, and it's terrifying and wonderful, and I don't want it to ever end." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "I'm asking you to make this permanent, Seraphine, not as a transaction or an arrangement, but as a choice we keep making, every day, together." I looked at the ring, simple and elegant, then at his face, saw the vulnerability he was offering, the deliberate choice to let someone have power over him. "Yes," I said, kissing him as the sun set over the Tagus. "To choosing each other, every day." We married quietly 6 months later, just us and a handful of close friends. No contracts, no terms, no boundaries beyond the ones we negotiated together. And from a chance encounter in a bathroom where I'd hidden from my past, we built a future neither of us had expected, but both of us chose deliberately. Some stories end with escape. Ours began there and became something else entirely. Something real. The call came at 3 a.m, sharp and insistent in the darkness of our bedroom. I felt Cillian tense beside me before he reached for his phone, his voice instantly alert despite the hour. "Ashford." A pause. "When?" Another pause, longer this time. "No. Don't engage. Maintain distance only. I'm on my way." He was already moving, pulling on clothes with efficient precision. "What's wrong?" I asked, sitting up and turning on the bedside lamp. His expression was controlled, but I'd learned to read the minute tensions that betrayed his emotions. This was serious. "Someone's inquiring about you," he said, buttoning his shirt. "Through channels they shouldn't have access to. Marcus picked up the chatter an hour ago." My stomach dropped. Trent? But he's still in prison. Not Trent, someone else. Someone who knows exactly who I am and what I do. He sat on the edge of the bed, taking my hand. "I need you to trust me right now, Seraphine. Can you do that?" "Of course. Pack a bag, essentials only. We're leaving within the hour." Fear spiked through me. Leaving to go where? "Somewhere safe while I handle this." He squeezed my hand. "I promise I'll explain everything, but right now we need to move quickly." I'd learned not to question Cillian's instincts about danger. If he said we needed to leave, we needed to leave. 30 minutes later, we were in the back of an unmarked car, Marcus driving with grim efficiency through the empty pre-dawn streets. Not toward the airport, but toward the waterfront. "There's a boat waiting," Cillian explained, his arm around my shoulders. "It will take us to a private location where no one can find us without considerable effort." "Who's looking for me?" "A collector I outbid 3 months ago on a piece he'd wanted for years. Damien Volkov." The name carried weight the way certain names did in Cillian's world. He's Russian mob, with connections throughout Eastern Europe. Not someone who handles losing well. "Why would he be asking about me?" Cillian's jaw tightened. "Because he's figured out that the most efficient way to hurt me is through you. And unlike Trent, Volkov has resources that match mine." The boat was exactly what I expected. Sleek, fast, and clearly built for evading attention. We boarded quickly, and within minutes, we were cutting through dark water toward destinations unknown. Below deck, in a surprisingly comfortable cabin, Cillian finally allowed his control to slip. He pulled me close, his forehead resting against mine. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I knew there were risks in my work, but I never thought someone would target you." "This isn't your fault," I said firmly. "You warned me from the beginning that you operated in gray spaces. Warning you and putting you in actual danger are very different things." He pulled back, his hands framing my face. "I need you to understand something, Seraphine. If it comes to a choice between protecting you and everything I've built, you win. Every time. Without hesitation." The fierce certainty in his voice made my breath catch. "What are you saying?" "That I'll burn it all down if necessary. The business, the contacts, the entire life I've constructed. None of it matters more than keeping you safe." I kissed him, pouring 3 years of trust and love into the gesture. "Then we'll burn it together if we have to. But let's try not burning anything first." His smile was brief but genuine. Practical as always. We spent 3 days on a private island off the coast of Croatia. Beautiful, isolated, and thoroughly secure. Cillian worked his phone and laptop constantly, coordinating with contacts I'd never heard him mention, building a response to whatever threat Volkov represented. On the 4th day, he emerged from a marathon video call, looking exhausted, but satisfied. "It's handled," he announced. "How?" Volkov was operating under a misunderstanding about my relationship with certain officials in St. Petersburg. Once that misunderstanding was corrected, along with evidence that pursuing you would bring attention he doesn't want, he agreed to back off. Cillian collapsed onto the couch beside me. We also came to an arrangement regarding a Fabergé egg he's been seeking. Call it a peace offering that costs me nothing but satisfies his ego. "So it's over?" "This immediate threat, yes, but it highlighted a problem I've been avoiding." He turned to face me fully. "My work puts you at risk. As long as I'm dealing in antiquities with questionable provenance, as long as I'm navigating between legal and not legal, there will be people like Volkov who see you as leverage. So what are you proposing?" "That we disappear." The words were quiet, but deliberate. Completely. Leave this world behind, liquidate the business, and build something new somewhere no one will find us. I stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. You're willing to give up everything you've spent 20 years building? For you? Without question. He took my hand. I've been thinking about it since we married. Whether this life, this constant maneuvering and risk is what I actually want, or just what I've always done. The answer becomes clearer every day. And what is the answer? That I want you more than I want any of this. That I want a life where 3 a.m. calls don't send us fleeing to private islands. Where you can exist without fear of being targeted because of who you're married to. I thought about the past 3 years. The excitement of Cillian's world? Yes, but also the constant low-level anxiety. The knowledge that danger lurked just beneath the surface of our beautiful life. Where would we go? I asked. Wherever you want. I have resources hidden in enough places that we could live comfortably anywhere, under new names if necessary, doing work that doesn't attract attention or enemies. You'd really walk away from all of this? I'd walk away from anything for you, Seraphine. He squeezed my hand. The question is whether you're willing to walk away from the life we've built. Because I won't lie. Disappearing means leaving behind friends, connections, everything familiar. I thought about Trent. About 8 months of hiding before Cillian had entered my life. About how that fear had reshaped everything until I barely recognized myself. Then I thought about the past 3 years. How Cillian had helped me rebuild not into who I'd been before Trent, but into someone stronger. Someone capable of making hard choices. Let's do it, I said. Let's disappear. His smile was pure relief. You're sure? I'm sure, on one condition. Name it. We take 6 months to plan it properly. Liquidate the business gradually so it doesn't raise flags. Set up our new identities carefully. And choose our destination together. Deal. He pulled me into his arms. Where should we start looking? Over the next 6 months, we executed the most complex operation of Cillian's career, our own disappearance. He sold off his inventory piece by piece, returning the genuinely stolen items to their countries of origin and placing the legitimately acquired ones with trusted dealers. We researched locations obsessively. Prague, Buenos Aires, Melbourne, Kyoto. Every city evaluated for safety, anonymity, and quality of life. In the end, we chose Lisbon, the city where Cillian had proposed, where we'd always felt a particular peace. Old enough to have character, large enough for anonymity, beautiful enough to make exile feel like choice rather than necessity. Cillian arranged for our new identities through contacts even I didn't fully understand. We became Alexandra and Sofia Tavares, Portuguese citizens with fabricated but thoroughly documented histories. The liquidation of Cillian's business was explained to his contacts as retirement. He was nearly 40, he told them, ready to step back and enjoy life with his wife. Some believed it. Others suspected something more, but Cillian's reputation ensured no one pried too deeply. We sold the New York apartments, transferred funds through multiple accounts to ensure they couldn't be tracked, and systematically severed ties to our old lives. The hardest part was saying goodbye to the few people we were close to. Marcus received a generous severance and a recommendation that would ensure employment anywhere he wanted. The colleagues I'd worked with at the auction house got vague explanations about family matters requiring relocation. On our last night in New York, we stood on the balcony of Cillian's penthouse, soon to be someone else's, looking out at the glittering city. Any regrets? He asked. Only that I didn't meet you sooner, I replied honestly. What about you? None. This world gave me a lot, but it took more than it gave. I'm ready for something different. The next morning, Alexandre and Sofia Tavares boarded a commercial flight to Lisbon. Not a private jet, not first class. Just 2 people among hundreds, completely unremarkable. We rented an apartment in Alfama, the old Moorish quarter with its narrow streets and fado music drifting from small restaurants. Nothing like the luxury we'd left behind, but comfortable and thoroughly anonymous. For the first month, we did nothing but exist, walk the cobblestone streets, drink coffee in neighborhood cafes, learn to be people whose lives didn't revolve around antiquities and danger. It was harder than I expected, letting go of the excitement we'd known. Some days I missed the auctions, the beautiful objects, the feeling of importance that had come with Cillian's world. But then, I'd look at him, reading peacefully on our small balcony, or making dinner in our modest kitchen, or laughing at something ordinary, and remember why we'd chosen this. After 2 months, we started a small business, a bookshop specializing in rare books. Nothing valuable enough to attract serious attention, but enough to satisfy Cillian's need to work with beautiful objects and my love of literature inherited from my parents. The shop became our new life center. We'd open late, close early, spend hours discussing first editions with the few customers who found us down our tucked-away street. It was peaceful, mundane, and exactly what we both needed. A year after our disappearance, we were having dinner at a small restaurant when I noticed Cillian tense slightly, his eyes tracking someone across the room. I followed his gaze to see a man in an expensive suit, clearly out of place in our neighborhood establishment. He was watching us with the focused attention of someone who'd been searching. "Do we run?" I whispered. "No." Cillian's voice was calm. "We wait." The man approached our table and I recognized him. Victor, one of Cillian's former contacts in the antiquities world. "Cillian Ashford," he said quietly. "Or should I say Alexandre Tavares?" "Victor." Cillian gestured to an empty chair. "Join us." Victor sat, accepting the wine Cillian poured for him. "I won't insult your intelligence by asking if you're surprised to see me. I assume you knew someone would eventually figure it out." "I knew," Cillian acknowledged. "What do you want?" "To deliver a message. From several of your former colleagues who've also figured out where you disappeared to." Victor sipped his wine. "They want you to know that your retirement is respected. No one will disturb your new life. Consider it professional courtesy for years of fair dealing." I felt Cillian relax fractionally beside me. "And in return?" "Nothing. This truly is courtesy." Victor smiled slightly. "Though I'll admit curiosity. Why walk away from everything you'd built?" Cillian took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine on the table. "Because I found something worth more than all of it." Victor's gaze moved to me, assessment without judgment. "The famous Seraphine. I heard you were the reason for the dramatic exit." He raised his glass. "To choices that surprise us all." We toasted, and Victor left as quietly as he'd arrived. "So they know," I said once we were alone again. "They know, and apparently approve." Cillian squeezed my hand. "We're safe, Seraphine. Truly safe." 2 years later, our bookshop had become a quiet fixture of the neighborhood. We'd made friends among the locals, lived simply, existed peacefully. The man I'd married was still Cillian in private, brilliant, controlled, sometimes intense. But Alexandre was softer, more relaxed, someone who could spend an afternoon organizing books without needing the thrill of dangerous acquisition. On our 5th wedding anniversary, we closed the shop early and walked to the Miraduro de Santa Lucia, watching the sunset paint Lisbon in shades of gold and rose. "Happy?" Cillian asked. I leaned against him, his arm around my shoulders. "Deliriously. You?" "More than I ever thought possible." He kissed the top of my head. "Thank you. For what?" "For being brave enough to hide in a stranger's bathroom. For trusting me with 3 weeks that became a lifetime. For choosing this quiet life over everything we left behind." I turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. For making me feel safe. For giving up an empire to build something real with me." We kissed as the sun set, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and chosen each other every day since. From a desperate escape into a stranger's bathroom to a life rebuilt from nothing in a city where no one knew our real names. Some would call it running. We called it choosing. Choosing safety over danger, simplicity over complexity, each other over everything else. And in the end, that choice became the greatest acquisition Cillian Ashford ever made. Not an artifact or piece of leverage, but a life worth living with someone worth living it for. The man who'd spent years collecting treasures for others finally kept the only one that mattered. Me. And I kept him. Forever.